This is the 3D VIEW-MASTER tale Heidi by Johanna Spyri. VIEW-MASTER Reel 1. Heidi and her grandfather. Picture 1. Heidi followed her aunt Det up the mountain path that climbed from the village to the Alm, an alpine meadow. The aunt was worried. She could still hear the voices of the villagers. "You are not taking your dead sister's child up to the Alm, uncle? How could you do such a thing? The old man will have nothing to do with anyone." The Alm uncle sat on a bench outside his cottage on the Alm, where he could see the whole valley. Heidi ran right up to him. "Good evening, grandfather. How are you this fine day?" "Well, well, what does this mean?" he asked roughly. He took her hand. His keen eyes looked at her intently from under bushy eyebrow. "Det," said the bag down, and spoke in a rush of words. "Good day, uncle. I bring you your son's child. I have a new job in Frankfurt, so now she must stay with you. You are her nearest relation. Goodbye, Heidi," saying which she returned and hurried away down the mountain. Picture 2. Her aunt gone, Heidi took off the extra dresses she had worn to save carrying. In only a light petticoat she began to run around, exploring everywhere. There was the goat stall to look at and the 3 tall fir trees to stand under. She could hear the wind sighing through the branches. Finally the grandfather milked the goat and toasted her a large piece of cheese. The milk was warm and rich, and the cheese was as soft as butter. She ate hungrily. When daylight faded, they went inside the cottage and Heidi asked, "Where am I to sleep, grandfather?" "Wherever you like," he replied. This pleased Heidi. She chose the hay loft, where a small round window gave a view of the distant snow-capped Alps. With the grandfather's help, she made a soft bed of straw and fell into a deep sleep. Picture 3. The next morning, a boy came up the Alm with a small herd of goats. The grandfather led his 2 goats out of their stalls to join the herd. "Heidi, would you like to go to the high pasture with Peter and the goats?" asked the old man. Fairly jumping for joy, Heidi followed Peter. Picture 4. At the high pasture, Peter watched Heidi play with the herd. The goats jumped and butted each other playfully with their horns, while she ran among them, laughing merrily. Peter suddenly ran to the cliff and grabbed a white goat just as he fell over the edge. "Help me, Heidi," he called, teetering on the brink. Heidi seized his ankle and pulled Peter and the goat to safety. The next moment Heidi was playing among the tiny red primroses, blue gentians, and yellow buttercups that covered the meadow. "I must take some back to grandfather," she thought, and set about filling her apron with fragrant blooms. Picture 5. At lunch, Peter milked one of grandfather's goats for Heidi. They had bread and cheese too. Heidi gave Peter most of her cheese, which made him happy. After a long afternoon, they drove the herd home. Heidi ran up to her grandfather to show him the flowers she had picked for him. When she opened her apron, she exclaimed, "What happened to my flowers?" The grandfather laughed, for the blooms were brown and dry. They want to be out in the sun, he told her. In your apron they fade and die. Now wash up for supper. Picture 6. Heidi went to the pasture with Peter every day until the cold autumn winds came. Then she stayed home and watched her grandfather make cheese and do his carpentering. Soon there was snow on the high pasture, and Peter no longer stopped by to pick up the 2 goats. One day a man, clad in black, came up the Alm and talked to the grandfather about Heidi going to school in the village. "No, pastor," she heard her grandfather say angrily. "Heidi grows and thrives with the goats and the birds. I will not have her spoiled in the village school." Picture 7. A day later, Aunt Deet came back. "How well the child looks," she said in her usual rush of words. "I've come to take her off your hands. A rich relative of my mistress in Frankfurt has an only daughter, Clara, who is lame, confined to a wheelchair. She needs a playmate, so I told him about Heidi. It is a stroke of fortune for her." Heidi looked at her grandfather, who remained silent. "They say in the village," Deet went on, "that you do not send the child to school or to the church in Frankfurt." "Hold your tongue, woman," thundered the old man. "Take the child, then, and ruin her. Never bring her into my presence again." Gathering Heidi's things, Deet laid the bewildered child down the path to the village away from the grandfather's cottage. VIEW-MASTER Reel 2, Heidi in the Frankfurt house, Picture 1. In the study of a Frankfurt house, a pale, dark-haired girl in a wheelchair put down her lesson book and yawned. "Read on, Clara," said the housekeeper sternly. "Isn't it time?" Clara asked impatiently. "Isn't it time for my new friend to arrive?" "Wheel me into the hall, Miss Rottenmeier." Picture 2. "Miss Deet and Heidi," announced Sebastian the butler, taking Heidi's bundle scornfully. Frowning, Miss Rottenmeier examined the Swiss girl. At last she said, "Heidi, that's not a proper baptismal name." Deet spoke up. "She was baptized Adelaide." Clara beckoned to Heidi. "Which do you prefer to be called, Heidi or Adelheid?" she asked. "My name is Heidi," she answered simple. "She looks too young," said Miss Rottenmeier. "What books have you studied?" "None," said Heidi. "I have never learned to read." "Mercy, that child cannot read!" cried the housekeeper. Picture 3. Study was no longer tiresome for Clara. The very first moment Heidi jumped up to see a carriage go by and pulled the tablecloth off, spilling books and ink on the floor. Heidi could not tell one letter of the alphabet from another. When Miss Rottenmeier pointed out a little horn or begged to help her, Heidi would remember a scene from the Alps and cry out, "It is a goat," or "It is an eagle." Now there was no time at all for yawning at Clara's study hour. Picture 4. From her bedroom, Heidi could see only houses and paved streets. She launched for the sight of green grass. One day she climbed to the top of a church tower, but could see only roofs and chimneys below. She looked so sad that the tower keeper gave her a basket of little kittens to take home. She ran into the house calling, "Clara, look, look!" Miss Rottenmeier looked, screamed, and jumped up on a chair. Clara clapped her hands, and a white-haired lady Heidi had never seen before said, "Hello, Heidi, I am Clara's grandmother, come to stay." The kittens are lovely. Picture 5. Clara's grandmother taught Heidi to read. She gave the child a book, turned to a picture of a shepherd standing in a green pasture and said, "If you learn to read, Heidi, the shepherd will become your friend." These words tell the story of why he left his father's house and of all the things that happened to him in a strange land. When you can read the story to me, the book will be yours to keep. With such a great prize to gain, Heidi mastered the ABCs and soon was sounding out words. After many weeks, she read the story of the prodigal son to the grandmother and was given the book. Soon she could read every story. Picture 6. Heidi found one picture in her new book that brought tears to her eyes. The snowy mountains in it reminded her of the Alps she had seen before her grandfather's cottage. She longed for the carefree days with Peter and the goats. Every night before going to bed, she prayed that she might go back to the Alm to live with her grandfather. Picture 7. As the days went by, Heidi ate less and less. She grew pale and seldom laughed any more. The grandmother watched her sit for hours, dreaming over the pictures of the mountains, and knew that Heidi was homesick. Then, one day after refusing to eat one bite for lunch, Heidi sighed and fell to the floor in a faint. "That settles it," said the grandmother. Heidi must go back to her mountains. Then, seeing Clara starting to cry, she added, "And you shall go with her." VIEW-MASTER Reel 3. Heidi returns to the Alps. Picture 1. Once again, Heidi climbed a path to the Alps' uncle's cottage. As she neared it, she ran ahead of the party crying, "Grandfather! Oh, grandfather!" The old man held out his arms, and for the first time in years his eyes grew moist. In a husky voice he said, "You have come home, Heidi. Did they send you away?" "Oh no, grandfather," she answered. "They wanted me to stay, but I had to live with you in the Alm. Oh, it's so beautiful. I've brought Clara home with me too." Picture 2. The grandmother returned to the village, but Clara slept with Heidi in the hayloft. 10 times during the night, the grandfather climbed the ladder to look again at Heidi. In Frankfurt, Clara found eating a chore. Now, when the grandfather milked a goat for her, giving her a cup with some bread and some toasted cheese, she surprised everyone by eating it all. "Tomorrow," said the old man, "there'll be 2 cups." Peter came by with the goats. Heidi explained to him that she would have to stay with Clara. Disappointed, Peter made a face and shook his fist at Clara's back. Picture 3. The pleasant days of summer passed. Heidi grew brown, and Clara's eyes sparkled and her cheeks glowed in the mountain air. Every day Peter begged Heidi to go up the Alm. Finally, the grandfather wheeled Clara up to the high pasture and lifted her out to sit among the mountain flowers. Having Clara to share Heidi with did not suit Peter. Angrily he gave the wheelchair a kick. The chair began to roll down the mountain. Faster it flew until, crash! it hit a tree and broke into pieces. Now I'll have to go home, moaned Clara. Picture 4. Don't cry, Clara, sobbed Heidi. We can do without a wheelchair. Come, Peter, we'll carry her. She was so heavy that Heidi said, Put your feet down, Clara. Maybe you can walk a little. The grandfather came upon them. So now you are almost walking, little Clara. I think if you try a little every day, we will have a surprise for your grandmother. It is the goat milk and the mountain air that are making you strong. Her prayers too, grandfather, Heidi reminded him. Picture 5. Every day Heidi helped Clara to stand and try to walk, and every day Clara's legs grew just a little bit stronger. In the evening Heidi would read from her beautiful book. She saved the story of the prodigal son for last. As her clear little voice read, the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called thy son. The grandfather bowed his head. After Heidi and Clara had fallen asleep, the grandfather fell down on his knees and, for the first time in many years, he prayed. Picture 6. Heidi, the grandfather's powerful voice rang out in the clear morning air. You and Clara put on your best dresses. Today is Sunday, and we will all go down to the village to church. Never had Heidi been so happy as she was now. As they neared the village, she went skipping down the road. Her grandfather looked so splendid in his fine clothes, and Clara laughed gaily as she was carried along in her grandfather's arms. She had such a wonderful surprise for her grandmother. Picture 7. When they reached the village church, Clara asked to be put down upon her feet. Standing there with a proud smile on her face and gently leaning on Heidi, she eagerly awaited her grandmother. What's this? Asked the grandmother when she saw them. My little Clara not sitting in her wheelchair? Clara freed herself from Heidi's supporting shoulder and took 1, 2, 3 shaky steps, crying, I'm walking, grandmother, I'm walking. Watching this scene, the alm uncle spoke to the pastor, saying, God is good. Through Heidi, he has made this girl walk and has shown me the foolishness of my living alone. Next winter, I will move down into the village so Heidi can go to school, and so we can both go to church every Sunday. You've been in the right church on the mountain, said the pastor. I will thank God who brought Heidi to us.